Hello and welcome to Unblocking the Chain, where we delve into the intersection of traditional finance and digital assets. If you're curious about how these two worlds collide, you've come to the right place. I'm Drew Bradford, and today I'm joined by the Honourable Dr. Andrew Charlton MP, Cabinet Secretary and Assistant Minister for Science, Technology and the Digital Economy, Federal Member for Parramatta. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be with you, Drew.
Mate, now you guys absolutely killed it. Not you guys as the Labor Party. As well, you individually got a massive swing towards you. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what do you think the Australian what drove the Australian public to your guys? Your analysts must have done a little bit of work too, because it was a bit of a surprise for everybody, the size of the win.
Yeah, look, I think if we're honest, everybody was a bit surprised by the size of the win. For me, I think it came down to a few things. I think that genuinely Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party were presenting pretty practical solutions to the problems that affect most Australians. And most Australians are impacted by the cost of living. There were a series of really clear and positive policies to address that. Healthcare, housing, infrastructure, the basics of life. And on the other hand, we had the Liberals who had done a great job in being an opposition, I think. They were very strong in their criticisms. They created a real point of difference through the term about things like cost of living. But what they didn't do was put forward really clear solutions to those problems. And so for me, their popularity was really going quite well through 2024 when people had in their mind them in the frame of opposition, doing a good job voicing their concerns. But then when we turned the corner into 2025, people's mindset shifted, and suddenly they weren't looking for Peter Dutton and the Liberals to be their voice of opposition and concern. They were looking at Peter Dutton not as the opposition leader, but suddenly as the alternative Prime Minister. And when that frame shift happened, then they were thinking not just is he good at voicing concerns, but does he have solutions? And that's where I think the Liberals came a little bit unstuck with policies that were delivered very late, policies that were quite light on. And when that match-up was occurring in people's minds as they went into the ballot box, they chose Labor.
Yeah, it was very evident on Polymarket. If you tracked the thing up until like December, early January, Dutton was like 67 cents, and I think Albo got down to 30. And that once the campaigning, so it's maybe the trajectory, exactly what you said, just changed during the campaign, and it flipped. So anyway. So let's dive into, now that you've got the big mandate from the Australian public. How is that going to focus into the digital asset community? The listeners of this podcast are going to want to know what are we going to get from Labor? Now, if I look going into the election, Angus Taylor had announced a 100-day plan for the digital assets, so they were going to do something very quick to make Australia regionally relevant. So that's obviously didn't get voted in. We've got the Labor Party. What can we expect from the Labor Party in this space, in the digital asset space?
Well, look, I think the first thing that you can expect from the Labor Party is that we take this sector very seriously. And you know that, Drew, because you and I have been working together on this for more than the last year. And for me, this sector is really personal. I have been working in and around this sector for a long time. In fact, before I was in Parliament, talking about the benefits of these technologies to Australia's financial services industry, and more broadly, the benefits of these technologies to Australian consumers. So I think number one is a recognition of how important the sector is. The Australian government knows that this is a sector that millions of Australians are engaged in. It is not a niche asset class, not a niche technology. It is a mass asset class and a mass technology. I think you have a government that recognises that 4 million Australians or more own this asset class. It is important to their own future aspirations. It's an important part of their wealth and their financial plans. And the government has a responsibility to make sure that that sector is efficient, that it is safe, and that it's working well. Beyond that, I think you've got recognition from the government that this sector is really important for Australia's future. My view, and I know the view of many of my colleagues, is that this sector and this technology will become absolutely core to the future of finance, and it will penetrate every aspect of the financial system. And the competitiveness of Australia's financial sector will be determined by our ability to harness and engage this set of technologies. So I think that's the first thing, that recognition.
Yeah, that improvement in technology, and I'm pretty excited personally to be involved with the RBA's Project Acacia, because just that, as you just touched on, the efficiency of the efficiency that financial markets, all financial markets, equities, fixed income, etc., can gain from tokenisation of the sector will be massive on a productivity front. So I guess there's probably 18 months or so of the Reserve Bank's work on this, but I can only see that, as you touched on, improving the sector.
Absolutely, and the benefits of these technologies go well beyond the financial sector. There's probably not a sector in the economy where productivity, consumer outcomes won't be improved by employing these technologies. So, as the Treasurer has really focused on productivity as being core to the second-term agenda of the government, and this type of technology is one of the big productivity opportunities that are out there for the Australian economy, and something that we're determined to go after very seriously. So going from there, in terms of answering your question about what the sector can expect from the government, I think one is that understanding. Secondly, engagement, and I think you've seen, particularly over the last 6 months, a real step up in engagement from the government, which led by the Treasurer, which is fantastic. We also have a new Assistant Treasurer, Dan Molino, who is going to be an incredible asset right across the Treasury portfolio. I think that engagement will continue. Really important for us to learn from the sector to make sure that we are understanding their perspective, working with them as we implement the changes that are required. I think the third thing you can expect from the government is some real positivity about this sector. And I think you've actually already seen that in statements that have come out from the government in the last few months, particularly from the Treasurer. A recognition that, and maybe a tonal change, if you like.
Absolutely, I can definitely attest to that.
And I'm not sure whether that's actually a change of perspective inside the government. I think the government has always been positive, but certainly an effort's been made to express that positivity about the sector, about the millions of Australians who engage in the sector, and about the future of the sector and its importance. And then, going from there into some practical steps, you saw a pretty clear statement come out from the government just a few months ago.
End of March.
Which outlined a future trajectory towards an effective regulatory framework for the industry that expressed some desires about how we treat the industry, how we grow the industry, how we make sure that Australia is a competitive place for the industry. And the implementation of that agenda was made clear in that statement that it would be a near-term priority for the government in this term of Parliament.
So what's your best guess on that timeline? Are we going to see something Q2?
Well, look, I'm gonna leave that.
So there's not a lot left of Q2, is there?
I'm gonna leave that to the Treasurer. But I think anybody who read the statement that he put out in March would have seen a sense of importance and urgency to the work here.
Yeah. Oh, look, I get from my personal interactions with you and the treasurer, it felt like a year ago it was recognition of the sector, but you know, I can only do, I don't know, 5 things at once, and you're number 7 or something. That's what it felt like. We were not in the zone. Whilst there was recognition, we weren't in the zone where things get done. It definitely feels to me we're in the zone now, that things are going to get done. So I guess it's up to us as the industry to do whatever we can to help give that little shove along. Now, you did touch on productivity, because Australia, we have had a little productivity problem over the last couple of years.
That's putting it politely, but yes.
Putting it politely. We've been slipping versus our, you know, if you look at other G20 countries. Have you guys done any thought as to, I suppose there's a bunch of causes, what was the general thoughts on that? Or what has been the underlying cause of that?
Yeah, look, there's no one factor behind that productivity decline. I should say, you know, it's a productivity decline that's pretty widespread across the world. So it's not something that's by any means unique to Australia. You know, there are some factors that were coming out of COVID that were contributing to that decline. There are some industry composition factors that are contributing to that decline. We obviously had a very strong labour market. And when the labour market is strong, it often has an impact on labour productivity measures. You know, we've had very, relatively low unemployment. We've got some issues that have been well canvassed about business investment and capital investment that has contributed to that decline. And all of those things are important, and the Treasurer's laid out, I think, a really strong agenda in order to begin to tackle some of those things with real focus in this term. Now that the hard work of getting inflation down has been substantially achieved over the course of the last couple of years. But for me, I think we can look in the rearview vision mirror on productivity, and that is important to do because there are lots of historic issues that have brought us to this point. But for me, the exciting thing is actually looking through the front windscreen, because there are a huge number of productivity improvement opportunities right in front of us. I have been an economist for more than 20 years, and I have never seen the productivity opportunities ahead of us that we have right now. The possibilities of AI to drive massive productivity across every single sector of our economy are just enormous. I see my own productivity growing on a daily basis as I use these tools. And that is true potentially for almost every single worker in the Australian economy. That is a huge prize that is in front of us, that is there for us to grab.
Yeah, it's actually quite an exciting time to be alive and to be involved. My personal view is combination of blockchain and AI. Between now and, say, 2030, the world is going to change a lot.
Absolutely.
This next 5-7 years is going to be so exciting for I guess for me, I'm diving into, I'm seeing the changes it's going to take traditional financial markets through. But you touched on this. It's going to be pretty much every industry is going to be different. And AI, the exciting thing about AI is not only does it learns how to learn. So it's like an exponential growth in our productivity. And the stuff you're seeing with robotics as well, it's pretty exciting.
Amazing. I think, people talk about AI as a general purpose technology that has the capacity to be of, the similar significance to the invention of electricity, the invention of the internet. I think that is potentially true, but there's also a possibility that is even more than that. When humans invented electricity, that was fantastic, but the invention of electricity did not then lead to that electricity going away and generating more electricity on its own.
Electricity, yeah.
Whereas AI is a technology which it's able to generate its own output. And to grow that output exponentially. And we're already seeing incredible breakthroughs generated by AI in fields of of science where humans have toiled for a very long time. So the opportunity of AI, not just to create knowledge, but to create its own knowledge and for that knowledge to grow exponentially is one of the biggest productivity opportunities that I think we have ever had. And the way that Australia
Yeah,
grabs those opportunities is going to determine our prosperity for the next couple of decades. And I feel that as an incredible responsibility of this government at this time. We have a responsibility to make sure that Australia remains one of the top tier of global nations in terms of our GDP per capita, in terms of our opportunities that our people have, the strength of our economy. And that question is going to be determined by our capacity to compete and engage in the digital economy with this handful of technologies. And that's our responsibility, to make sure that Australia harnesses that opportunity and turns that into prosperity for our people.
yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, like I said, you guys, you're in government at a very exciting time to be in government, or just be in business for what we're going to see over the next few years. Diverging just a little bit, there's a bunch of regulation around the world that's going on. You've got the Genius Act going in the States. You've got stuff going on in Europe for the digital assets industry. How are you guys looking at what's going on in the States, what's going on in Europe? Hong Kong's just they're basically hopping their people out of the sandbox into the real world on stable coins. Singapore's been probably driving the truck. I just went over to Token 2049 in Dubai a couple of weeks ago. What's going on in the Middle East in the space is phenomenal. How are you as a government looking at other sectors, and does that impact, given how much that's accelerating, particularly in the US, who were, you've only got to go back 6 months, and they had the handbrake on the industry, and now they've foot's on the gas.
Yeah, look, absolutely. We are looking very closely at developments around the world in this sector. We've seen what's happening in the Middle East. We've seen progress in Singapore, some of our other Asian neighbours, and of course the huge, almost 180-degree turn that's happened in the United States. We watch that very closely for two reasons. One is it gives us good guidance on what kinds of things other countries are doing and what we might learn from them as we implement our own regime in Australia. But secondly, we're really conscious that we don't want Australia to fall behind. It doesn't mean that we're going to copy everything that different jurisdictions around the world are doing. It doesn't mean that we're intent on being the first mover in every single one of these. But it does mean that we want to make sure that what we do here in terms of establishing a regime is consistent with a competitive industry that can attract capital from around the world and deliver competitiveness. So all of these changes are certainly top of our agenda to be watching, learning from, and incorporating into our implementation.
Awesome. Now, I remember when the budget came out, I think it was initially reported, and was trying to find this this morning, that the funding for ASIC went down a little bit. I've since looked at it, and it looks like ASIC's funding actually went up a bit. Obviously, our regulator is going to play a pretty critical role as we regulate. There's going to be a lot of guys knocking on the door to get AFSLs or all the exchanges. Now, if you go on to Austrac, there are 430 registered digital exchanges. How do you think ASIC's going to go with once all these people dive in and say, I need an AFSL? How do you feel that our regulator is going to be a little stretched?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say about our regulators is that they have a very difficult job. Obviously,
yeah, I sure do.
Obviously, technology is moving very quickly. They've got the twin responsibility to keep up with those changes, to maintain competitive markets, to not unduly restrain innovation, but on the other hand, of course, to keep our markets secure, safe, and stable.
Yep.
So that is always a balancing act, and that balancing act is at its most acute in areas of fast-moving technology like this one. So it's a challenging space for a regulator. I think the key thing for the government is to make sure that we provide direction, and that direction then generates alignment. And so the statements that you've seen from the Treasurer, some of the announcements that he has made, I think those things will really help to provide direction and to help deliver alignment across agencies and across the government. And I think already seeing some good progress in that area. In terms of ASIC's ability to deliver on that regime and make sure that it is practical, these are issues that are going to have to be worked through once that regime is landed. But certainly we don't want to see undue delay. We don't want to see outcomes that cause dislocation for market participants. We don't want to see unnecessary and burdensome regulation or waiting times for those market participants. So that's very important as we think about how to land the agenda in a way that provides good support to the industry, confidence to international players, and also a safe and well-respected regime here that consumers can have confidence in.
Yeah, the ASIC definitely have, I guess, a tough time now until that they're trying to fit, the round peg into square hole at the moment, trying to take digital assets and put them in regulations that aren't quite fit for purpose. So it'll be great when we do get the regulations through, and ASIC will know exactly what they're doing and they can hold people to account. Hey, wanted to touch on, literally, the industry has gone through, you just touched on debanking. We have, as an industry, and one of the firms I'm involved in personally experienced, you cannot open that bank account if it's crypto related. Do you guys have a thoughts on debanking? Because it's very, very difficult if you're in the digital assets industry to get a bank account at, NAB, Westpac, CBA, ANZ. They don't want to know you right now.
Yeah, I'm certainly aware of the problem and the causes of that problem, and I definitely recognise that has provided some real constraints to the industry. I'm going to be a little bit careful about what I say in response, because there are a couple of competing objectives here that banks and regulators are working their way through. But let me say that the aspiration for the government is to provide a market that is competitive, that enables the industry to grow, to serve its enormous customer base in Australia and give that customer base world-leading options, world-leading safety, and a world-leading market in which they can engage with these assets. So there is, and obviously the relationship between the banking sector is very important to that, and those are issues that need to be worked through. So we're certainly aware of the problem, aware of some of the causes of that problem, and conscious that it's a pretty important part of the solution. But being careful about the way that we engage in that solution to respect the market participants and the different motivations at play.
Yeah, the whole scams for this industry, and I guess scams have been going on whenever there's something new. You get people trying to exploit it. I did this big article in the FT yesterday that ranked countries, and Singaporeans are the biggest sufferers of per person on crypto scams. And I was happy to see that Australia's not in the top 10 of scammed countries. So our banks have definitely, because we were right up there 12 or 24 months ago.
Correct.
So it's great to see. So the banks have done a pretty good job of protecting consumers.
Absolutely, and we might not be in the top 10 of that list, but there is no question that Australian consumers and businesses are under daily assault from a whole range of scams. My previous role in the last term was in cyber security, and without strong cybersecurity, without strong confidence from Australian consumers and businesses that they're safe in the online world, it creates an incredible digital chill, a reluctance for people to engage in that digital world. I've rarely felt like there was more concern or fear on the part of Australians when they pick up the phone. I see it in my constituents, particularly older constituents less familiar with technology. For some of them, for the first time in their lives, they see an unknown number come up on their phone, and it genuinely strikes fear into them. So getting on.
I don't answer those anymore.
Yeah, getting on top of that cybersecurity, scam prevention, I think is an absolute bedrock for the digital economy. I think it is obviously has had double-edged sword effects in the short term for the digital assets industry, but in the long term, I think that as much as we can do to promote cybersecurity, to make Australians feel safe as they engage in these technologies, the better it will be for the industry. And that's why this government has been so focused on safety in online spaces and as an important part of our digital agenda, because I see it as an enabler, as something that will promote our digital economy and in the long term help to build it, not hold it back.
Yeah, I think look, ANZ, Westpac, CBA, they're all involved in the RBA's Project Acacia. They've got people on the industry advisory board. So as the technology gets credibility at an RBA level, I think the banks will relax. And actually, when you think about it, stablecoins and programmable money are much more traceable than cash. Yeah. So you've actually got a lot more chance, if you do get scammed, if you're using stablecoins, for instance, as a representation of the Aussie dollar, of getting your money back than you have.
In some ways. In some ways.
Well, you know where it is. You will always know where it is.
Yeah, you might know where it is, but it might be a bit harder to get it back, I think would be the two-line summary. So I was just, look, Tether were helping the US government, and they just basically disintegrated, to use a technical term, 20 million that someone had it was proven to be stolen. So Tether just killed it. And the person, then they can, reissue new coins to that person, and you can't do that with cash. Anyway, we'll see what the future holds there. Hey, look, one last thing. It is new technology. Is there any plans to do sort of public education? You're leaving that up to, I guess, the sector to educate people as we regulate and try and get the benefits. Any thoughts on public education into the space? Look, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest things that we have to tackle together. I think there is a lot of misinformation out there about digital assets. Some of that misinformation is particularly unhelpful for the growth of the industry. Some of it means that there are plenty of people who don't fully understand the opportunity, plenty of people who don't fully understand the risks, and so I think making people aware of the opportunity delivered by these technologies. I mean, to put it really crudely, this is something which is not the exclusive domain of crypto bros and finance sector people. This is something that everyday Australians can engage in and get benefit from. And making those case studies really practical in digital assets and more broadly in the application of blockchain technology to the everyday lives of Australians. A payment system which is easier, cheaper, quicker, benefits in...
No one likes that extra 5 cents when you buy your cappuccino each morning. We want to get rid of those fees.
Correct. We have a vision for a payment system which is instant, invisible, and free. And
absolutely,
that future payment system, which everybody is heading towards, will be built on these technologies. So to answer your question, absolutely. I think the more Australians we can make sure that people can see the benefits, see that these aren't benefits for somebody over there in, in high-rise towers in Sydney, but they're benefits for everyday Australians in every suburb and town of this country. And this will make a practical, positive difference to people's lives. That would be a huge unlock in terms of the
We'll
way
get
that people
there.
see
I'm
the
positive
industry.
of that.
Yeah, and you guys have done some fantastic work on that, and others have as well. So I think that's, for me, if we could wave a magic wand, broadening that understanding would be right up there on the list of tasks to do.
Thank you very much. That's been awesome, and looking forward to working with you and your team and taking this forward. I think, having, you mentioned Dan Molino coming in the assistant treasurer's role. We've got some pretty qualified people in some great seats. So looking forward to working with you guys.
Likewise.
Thanks very
Drew.
much.
Cheers.